Today I'm going to show you how to build a blockchain REST API. So maybe you want to create your own API so you can host it on Rapid API or something like that, and people and you can make money from it when people can use it. Or maybe you need it for your own application or project that you're building. I haven't seen too many videos out there about this exact thing, putting all these pieces kind of together, so we're just going to try it today and see what happens. So to create a Node API, I'm going to start off with a Vercel template. And I think, let me just search and see what comes up for Node. Node.js serverless functions. I feel like this seems like it could work. Yeah, this is basically what we want. It's just a project template that's going to let us hit the endpoint and get a response back. So that's really all we need, is just that boilerplate. And the nice thing about Vercel is you can just deploy it right away and it'll create a repository and everything for you. I'm going to name this Blockchain API Tutorial. And it doesn't have to be private. All right, and it's creating the Git repository for us. I've got my hibiscus tea here with us today. Woo! Created. Code not found. That's interesting. I wonder if this template no longer exists or something. Let's just see. Okay, yeah, cool, perfect. It's just because there's no UI for this project, so that makes sense. This is just the API side only. So if we go to the actual endpoint URL, we get the response there. So that's all we really care about for this project. So that's great. And this is deployed now, as you can see. It's deployed at this domain. And if we go to GitHub and go to my repositories, there she is. It created a blockchain API tutorial repository for us and deployed the application. So that's what I love about Vercel. It's so easy to set up, and now it already has automatic deployment, so anytime we push changes to the main branch, they're going to be automatically deployed to Vercel. So that's really handy. Oh good, and this is also already a TypeScript file. I thought I was going to have to probably convert this project to use TypeScript, but it already does, so even better. Okay, I'm going to go ahead and just clone this project. All right, and open it up in VS Code. Oh no, that is not at the right folder level, obviously. Okay, so here we are. We have the code locally, and I'm going to do an npm install. And then it should just be, I think it's npm run dev, right? Oh, Vercel dev. All right, let's just try that and see what happens. Oh, I need to install Vercel. Sure. So now it's running in localhost. Perfect. And then we should be able to hit the endpoint /API/hello. Should be able to hit it locally. Serverless function crashed. Abort signal. Oh, this is the old, yeah, because this is the old version. So there we go. Okay, so I ended up I had to create this tsconfig file and tell the compiler that we want to use ES5 and to recognize type module in the package JSON. Not what I want to focus on in this video. I'm just doing this like live right now. I didn't like plan this ahead of time necessarily. So I'm leaving some of these sort of mistakes, if you will, in or different kind of paths that we go down, because that's the way the development actually is. Probably it wouldn't hurt to pick a newer Next.js template, because the way they do the way they structure the folders now, they have the API folder inside of an app folder, and then within API, each route is its own folder, and there's a route.ts file inside each of those folders for each route, and it's just a little bit more updated and you don't run into this particular issue. But besides the point, we can now hit this endpoint locally. We get the response, hello world, being returned from this endpoint. Great. So what we're going to use to build this blockchain API is something called the graph. Now you might be familiar with the graph. It's an indexing protocol for organizing and accessing data from blockchains and storage networks. If data isn't indexed, it can take forever to get it from a database. The graph basically makes it so developers can access indexed blockchain data through open APIs, and they call these subgraphs. It basically makes it much easier to query data that would be really difficult to query directly. Like imagine if you wanted to do like aggregations on blockchain data or something like that. It would be super resource intensive and really hard to do. And the graph solves this by using subgraphs that define, let me just pull it up here, the graph protocol. So the graph solves this by using subgraphs that define the smart contracts of interest and the events in those contracts that we want to pay attention to for a particular query, and then how to map that event data to data that the graph then stores in its database. If you want to know more about how this works, I will link the documentation for this in the description. Now you can create your own subgraphs and deploy them if you want, or you can choose from a bunch of existing subgraphs, which are right here. You can choose from a bunch of existing subgraphs that other people have already made, which is what we're going to be doing for today. So the first thing we need to do is install the graph client dependency with this command here. Keep making this a little bit bigger. I always like to sip tea while things install when I'm working on a project. Although it's already starting to get a bit cold. I usually have my Ember mug that I use to keep my tea warm, but I don't have it today. Okay, now that we've installed the graph CLI, we need to create a couple files in the root of the project. I'll just go ahead and do that here from the command line. So we need to create a YAML file for the graph client. So what we need to do is configure our graph client YAML file to point to the subgraphs that we want to use. And for this example, the subgraphs that we're going to be using are going to be this Uniswap v3 subgraph and also the ENS subgraph. I'm curious to see what data we get back from these. I have not tried them yet. So in our YAML file, we are going to add a list of sources and specify where we want to point to. So first we'll use the ENS subgraph. And we'll set it up like this. And the endpoint we want to use, for this endpoint, we come over here and click query. It's going to give us the endpoint that we need. But I do need to create an API key first in the subgraph studio. Yeah, that's fine. Just use my test wallet. Whoop. We'll use the one that has some testies still in it just to be safe. We don't need to worry about that right now. All right, I'm gonna create my first API key. Let's call it Sarah's graph test key. And I do want to get my 1,000 free queries. You have 1,000 free queries remaining for this API key. Awesome. Okay, so we can copy this key. And now, well, actually, let's copy the query URL for this subgraph and just put it right in here. And then I'm going to replace this with my API key. You obviously would want to use an env file for this important information. I'm going to put it here for convenience, but now we need to update the package JSON to include a script to run the graph client build and serve commands. Okay. There we go. Now we can see graph client serve dev is running, and perfect. We now have a GraphQL playground in the browser. Now, if you're not familiar with GraphQL, you might want to get familiar with it if you want to be able to use Graph Protocol. GraphQL is a query language for APIs. Most likely you have heard of it. I'll link this to down below because I don't want to spend a bunch of time explaining GraphQL because there are plenty of places to look for that, but GraphQL is pretty cool. It essentially lets you access all your data from a single endpoint. Now, we are building a REST API, but in order to query our subgraph, we do need to use GraphQL. So we're going to have to create a GraphQL query to call the subgraph and then return that response from our REST API endpoint. So let's try and just create a query in here and see if we can get data back from this subgraph. Let's see if this query does anything. I have no idea if this is still the way that this subgraph is structured. It is. Incredible. Look at that. We get data back. So we're querying our ENS protocol subgraph, and we're getting data back from the blockchain using GraphQL, calling the subgraph, and we're able to get ENS domain registration data. And you all probably know ENS protocol, what ENS is, right? It's the Ethereum domain name service. So this is where you have like, I own sarahbenson.eth, for example. So your .eth address is set up to the ENS protocol. So we're querying for different registrations and their domain name and expiry date, and we get data back. And it was so easy to just do that right here in the browser using the GraphQL playground that was spun up for us by the Graph Protocol CLI. We also can see that back in our code, a graph client folder was created with our schema and our sources and everything inside of it. Now, inside of the index.ts file in here we go. There's an export execute, and we can use this to execute queries programmatically against the subgraphs that we configured. So let's go ahead and create a new directory called GraphQL. And inside this directory, let's create a file called getLatestRegistrations.gql where we can actually store this GraphQL query that we just created. So we'll just paste the query right in here. And then over in our package JSON, we have a code gen script right here that we added. If you didn't add that yet, you're going to want to go ahead and add that. I can't remember if I showed that or not. But what we're going to do now is we're going to execute that script. We're going to run npm run codegen. Ooh, it hated that. Okay, I took a little break there for a bit, and I've come back and have this working in a different Vercel project. So we tried to run the code gen script, and remember it gave us this huge, ugly, mean error. And basically what this error is ultimately saying is another TypeScript error, doesn't like the file extension, blah, blah, blah. So I spun up a really quick plain TypeScript project and everything ran perfectly. So that pretty much confirmed my suspicion that that Vercel template was just old. It doesn't use the new Next.js app routing for the API. And it just had some really old, I think it just had old packages and stuff. So rather than fight with that a whole bunch, because that's really not the point of this video, I just picked a new Vercel template. I picked this one right here that's a much newer one and that I've already used before, know it works. So it has a bunch of extra stuff in it, like database stuff with Supabase and whatever that we don't need for this project, but we'll just ignore that for now because the API part works a lot better. So I just did everything the exact same that I just showed you, just did it with this template. So I deployed this new template, so it has a deployed version just like the old one. It created me a GitHub repository. I cloned this repository, and then I did all the exact steps that we just did, added these build scripts, installed the Graph CLI, ran these build scripts, it generated this folder, And then when I ran the code gen this time, it ran, instead of giving us this big ugly error, we can get rid of this terminal entirely. We're working with this terminal now, and this is what's supposed to happen when you run graph client build. It ran these nice little commands and finished successfully. So now inside of this folder, we have a sources file and index.ts and a schema GraphQL file. So it generated all of that for us like it's supposed to. I copied over the YAML file, obviously, and I copied over the query. So we have everything in here that we had before. In this project, this is what the endpoint looks like right now. So I have this running in localhost, and I hit this route/API/hello. Oops. That's not how you spell hello. I can see I get back this hello message response. So it just looks slightly different because this is the new and updated Next.js stuff, which is what we should use anyway. So sorry about that. That's what happens when you just kind of go for it and build something real time. But so yeah, you can see that the API folder is inside of our app directory now, and then we have a hello folder within that, and then a route.ts file, and that is what gets us this endpoint. So we're back to where we were. Everything's working as expected. Now all we need to do is import this GraphQL stuff into our API endpoint. So we're going to import the execute function from our graph client, and then we're going to take our query and also paste that in here. And then we're probably, we're going to need to install a package, the GQL tag npm package. Yeah, GraphQL tag. We need to go ahead and install this so that we can just use the little, conveniently use this GQL tag for our query. So, cool. And then inside of here, we're just going to execute this function and pass the query into it. Just like that. And I'm going to go ahead and console log the result so we can see it working. All right. Now, if we go to our app and hit this endpoint, compiled. Boom, we can now see we do get data back. Now we're gonna have to do a little bit of formatting work here, clearly, but we are getting data. Result.data.registrations. What if we just like to see what one looks like? Beautiful. Just so that we can drill down a little bit and know that the data we're getting actually is correct and actually does match what we have here in our GraphQL playground. Just like that, we can call a REST endpoint and get back data using GraphQL and the Graph protocol from the blockchain. Now, we mentioned earlier that one of the advantages of using Graph protocol is, what if you wanted to do aggregations or get different data from different, completely different on-chain protocols that would ordinarily have no relation to each other. So if you're doing this, there's a good chance that maybe you're going to want to gather more information than from just one subgraph, right? So what if we wanted to call two subgraphs at once? In our graph client YAML file, all we have to do is create another entry. So this one we're going to call the Uniswap v3. Oops. The Uniswap v3 subgraph. And so we just set it up the same way. And that subgraph is right here. So same thing, we'll click on the query, copy the query URL. There it is. I'm going to paste my API key back in. Now it's cool because if you aren't sure what to query on a particular subgraph and you just want to test it out, there's actually a GraphQL playground built into the page for each one of these subgraphs, and you can just copy the query that they already use as a test query, and you can try different queries in here where you can look at the documentation and everything for the subgraph too. And that way you know that you have a working query to start with. So let's call this one, I'm just going to call it get tokens because it looks like that's what it's doing, .gql. And then all we should need to do is run our code gen script again. Yay, success! And we can see in our, we should be able to see in our graph client folder here that we have another source listed for Uniswap v3 subgraph. Now in our endpoint, let's call this one ENS query, and then let's make another one Uniswap query. ENS result, and then we'll do the same thing. Uniswap result. And then let's console log that data also. And we'll say Uniswap. And for this one, we'll say ENS. Uniswap result. Just to see what the shape of this data looks like. So we'll wait for that to compile. And now if we hit our endpoint again, and we may have to wait a little bit of time here for these queries to execute, and we do get data back from Uniswap as well. So once again, if we drill down, then we do see there is data for each one of those objects coming back as well. Now, of course, your endpoint's up to you. You can return however much data you want, organize it however you want. For this example, I'm just going to return the first results of each one. So instead of returning hello from this endpoint, I'm going to return ENS. And the first result for ENS. And Uniswap v3. And the first result for Uniswap v3. So now, get rid of these console logs. We should see this response right here when we hit this route. There it is, ENS in Uniswap v3, and it prints the data right here. So we're getting blockchain data into our REST API, and this Next.js project, this endpoint, is a REST endpoint. So if I were to show an example of this, like with curl, it's literally just a regular REST endpoint GET request. Now, because we made these changes with Vercel, we can just push this directly to the main branch on GitHub in the GitHub repository, and it will deploy automatically to our deployed URL. We should be able to check our branch, and we'll just go ahead and push all of our changes to it. Created subgraph endpoint. And push it to the main branch. So we've upgraded the repository, and that has kicked off a deployment for us on Vercel that's building in progress. And once that's complete, we'll be able to go and hit this endpoint and get this data back from anywhere. Okay, it finished. Status ready, updated 1 minute ago. So let's go to the project and hit the URL. And there it is. Right away, we get our data back super quick. I will link this in the description below so you can check out this repository, you can check out the Vercel template that we used, and you can go to this URL yourself. If you wanted to continue and build upon this, of course you would want to add API keys and rate limiting to your endpoints before releasing them to the public, but there's lots of videos and documentation out there already that exist on how to do that, so that could be a fun way to challenge yourself to build more on top of this, or I can also, I'm happy to create a video as well about how to do that stuff if that's something people are interested in, but again, lots of other people have made videos on those topics. This is super simple to do, only takes a few minutes, and you can have blockchain data in your REST API. Thank you all for watching. Definitely let me know in the comments what other videos you would like to see, other builds, just other topics you want me to talk about. I have lots of ideas and have been filming a lot, so I'm looking forward to this year and all of the content that's going to be on this channel. So I'll see you in another video.